Please take your seats. We're about to begin. Dear friends, since today Irina Prokhorova fell ill and we had to move our sessions, so we have little time left. Let's just... My class will be till dinner, and after dinner Lev Gordon will continue his talk about civic activity in municipal projects. Well, the topic of our roundtable today has to do with the language of bylaws, and in a proper sense of the word, with legislation level. Oh, language, sorry. Well, I thought that we could... Why I thought this topic was important? Because we have quite a lot of people who work as deputies, assistants to deputies, or government officials, and we haven't done anything for them. Whereas the topic of language of legislation is very interesting, as I think. Some examples I will quote. Based upon 3 or 4 publications I prepared for FAPSI and others. The thing is that the situation about language of bylaws in this country, this situation is, as I see it, unacceptable, especially for a state that seems to be speaking for and trying to protect not only in Russia, but also abroad, to protect a language. The thing is that our legislation might be redundant in some way. People in the legislative power think that maybe people who have to execute, they need very much detail, and they think that in every position, whatever it applies to, say, to copyright, tax, pensions, or whatever, healthcare, they want to put it all. So our legislation is not about providing general principles, which would further might be used by judges who have their own interpretation and opinion. Instead, it should seek to give very detailed procedures for and very small details. For this reason, the language of statutory enactments or standard regulations or normative acts, whatever English would be trying to render Russian normativny act. For this reason, the language they use for in these acts is hardly ever human Russian. So I thought that in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, it was thought that slaves were not supposed to know or understand laws. It is something that only free citizens were entitled for, and they should be able to make some intellectual effort to understand it. But the situation is somewhat different. We have no slaves here, but lawyers and officials disagree with this, although quite recently I organized this discussion under the auspices of open government. They seem to be concerned about it. So we could see all kinds of response. But nevertheless, on behalf of lawyers and on behalf of government officials, we could hear that, look, colleagues, what is it that you want? It's legal language. It's unlike anything else. It should be precise. We should take away all kinds of approximations. It should be exact. And it's not really like the standard Russian today. Actually, this argument does not seem serious to me. There are attempts at both translate taxation code into modern standard Russian and other pieces of legislation. And if any author of statutory enactment felt like writing in plain, proper Russian, and instead of having like several pages, no, if they were keen to write in a more comprehensible manner using simple language and simple sentences, there is nothing that stands in their way in this case. Let me give you several examples here. They're pretty hard to read because, look, this is horrible, absolutely awful language that you could hardly ever even pronounce, tongue twisters, but again for you to feel just like the taste or the gusto. A quote from the taxation code. I must just save my breath because all these phrases are usually very, very lengthy and have poor accordance with one another. So this phrase runs like this. This is just typical example of how our tax code is about. The sum of a loss on operations with financial instruments of deals that are turned over in the market, organized market, whose basis are securities of stock exchange indices or other instruments whose base are either, again, securities or indexes that were received as a result of the said operations during the taxation period after we deduct the base of the transactions that take place in the market, and tax operations with securities that, again, are listed in the organized market of securities are taken into consideration in accordance with item 16 of article such and such. Well, this phrase, why is it in terms of any linguist, it's absolutely unacceptable, because this turnover, and again, this phrase is repeated, I think, 4 times. The term financial instruments is repeated 3 or 4 times in the same sentence, and so on and so forth. And since, well, laws are written using this awful language, this is why we see some absolutely laughable examples. For example, the tax code about the tax rebate or deduction from income tax. Well, unlike VAT, income tax is something that anybody, common people, should understand, because income tax is what we all pay, and we should know what our rebates we are entitled to. Well, but in this article there is a phrase like this: tax rebate is given in doubles to the only parent, and then it's repeated. Giving this tax rebate to an only parent stops at a month next after the parent marries. So if you can listen to it, you understand that parents can be, it could be like single parents, some like sole parents. It's like some innovation in biology. There are many other, for example, curiosities and silly things like customs code says, in order to put into order the legal framework of the customs authority, and because of enactment of the Code of Administrative Violations, as of such and such dates, the acts published before the word "заводить," and such as to start, with all its derivatives that have to do with start criminal procedure, to be replaced by the word instigate prosecution. So The situation is getting even worse if you look at the fate of the same law in the same, say, we could see how the language really gets worse. There are pretty much what we call old laws that were adopted at the dawn of the Russian Federation. For example, the law to protect the rights of consumers or civil code. If you look just by layer, what the law was at first, when amendments were made in the late 1990s, early 2000, what are the current amendments, you could immediately see how this language of stated reenactments, how it is really degrading. Well, another important contribution by this degradation was made about the year 2000-2001. Could we have your attention, please? This phrase, like authorized or qualified organs of the Russian Federations. For example, whatever it is, Ministry of Communications or whatever, instead they would write authorized organs or bodies of the Russian Federation. Because it underwent continuous reorganization, and in order not to change the name, that's why they put in place, they would put this phrase that said, such and such organ that is authorized to carry out these functions. But this phrase is so heavy that once they tried to put it in everywhere, it immediately turned a sentence into something very, very incomprehensible. It's something that is totally illegible. Well, nowadays, the situation has reached its just absolute craziness. If, for example, we could just look for bad examples of bad Russian within the text by government enactments and orders and whatever, nowadays, it's not the very text, but even the names, which actually are supposed to be simple, transparent, are nowadays become absolutely crazy. Well, a unique example of a kind is something that was adopted slightly then 18 months ago, a publication by our beloved Ministry of Economic Development. The name is, I'm really not sure I can read it aloud because it's almost half a page. But the name of this prikaz or order is like this: about approving the order and ways to refer to organs that provide government registration of titles and deed to the owner of the title, to the owners of the title, realty of sending them notification about registered encumbrances, limitations that are attached to the application for title when they provide accept from the registry of property. Well, I'm not reading, could not even read the full name. It's just 1/4 of the name of the document, mind you, of the document that they published. Again, a wealth of examples. Well, for example, a law that is supposed to be understood by just people in the street. And they often say, look, all these orders, all this is just professional matter. Why are you looking for bad language, for bad Russian in texts that are supposed to be going to people in government procurement or... Okay, that might be the case. Let us suppose this is the way, but let's look at the bill, which, for example, like a law to consumers, is supposed to be easy to understand for people in the street. This is about investing your pensions, about the savings portion of your pensions. The very name of this, it's actually almost correct. If it was supposed to be properly named, then it would be something like about pension savings, and that would be it. Well, in point of fact, the name is about investing money to finance the savings part of the wages pension in the Russian Federation, the earned pension of the Russian Federation. So, as you know, the name of the law predetermines its character, and had it been about pension investment or about savings, then the name would not be corresponding to the sense. Well, another passage from the law, I will just read aloud 1/3, for example. If an insured person has made use of its right to choose an investment portfolio by the managing company, the savings made in his benefit were transferred to the respective managing company, or the newly paid contributions to the savings part of the insurance pension, as well as additional contributions to the pension, as well as contributions by the employer paid for the benefit of the employee, as well as financed contributions that are happening because of the federal law, and so on and so forth. And the point of all this, the gist of all this, is that if you once made a choice, all further contributions will be sent to the same party where you choose. Once my friends Louis and myself tried to translate it into human Russian, and we got something like the foundation, because or fund. You cannot even, if you in the preamble you mentioned that pensions fund, further hereinafter referred to as the fund. The preamble is about to just clarify these notions and give definitions. So if we've done it in a preamble, we could really rewrite it in this way. The fund sends all the contributions by the person into the company that he has selected. And this is where mother's capital, or if the employer makes some contribution, they're also sent to the same organization and party. That's it. There's nothing more about it. Again, when I spoke about curiosities, I forgot to mention an excellent example about auditors, which, like other lawyers, actually are instrumental in many legislative acts and statutory enactments published by the Ministry of Finance. And they bore the blame for it in yet another bylaw of the Ministry of Finance that regulates the work of auditors. First, there was a huge phrase that made all the violations that an auditor could make, and then those who are to blame, they can be reprimanded according to the established by this federal law procedure. And what could be? They could not be reprimanded, but it could be imposed. What could be imposed? Nobody knows. So the problem, they are not something pertinent to Russia. Many countries try to address it and to do something, to translate this legal talk. German and Swiss authorities have introduced what they call linguistic expertise. First, they taught the government officials to speak, not this bird speak, but speak human language, and then they had this linguistic expertise that would immediately rule out all the texts that is not written in proper, good, standard language, and before they rewrite or it in proper manner and whatever. In English-speaking country, the situation is somewhat simpler because they have case-based law, and laws are not supposed to. It's not meant that the legislator has to provide for almost every possible or imaginable case. It can just describe the general principles, and then the courts that are good, independent, and you name it. And later on, since it is case-based law, you don't have to put every possible detail, try to squeeze it into the new law. But nevertheless, even they can come up with absolute outstanding pieces. For example, there is a section in the legislation about goods and services drawn by the tax authority in Australia. It's more is pure and simple. The Australians at a certain time came with this provision. In order to return in line with this subsection verdict, the Commissioner can A, consider a certain event in which indeed took place as something that never took place. B, to consider a certain event that never took place in reality as something that has taken place in reality. And when needed, it can consider this event as C, as something that has taken place at a certain time, and D, accompanied by certain activities by a certain legal entity, as well as consider certain event in reality that has taken place as something that has taken place, but not at the time when it really took place, but that our officials could even dream of, and so on and so forth. Don't let us posit pluralities. Instead, we have an hour before dinner, which we cannot be late for. Let us run a small exercise. Well, now you're free to split into several groups very much.
You can break into groups like you did yesterday, or just whatever way you choose to split into groups and try to. So it's kind of it will be a practical exercise. So take any part of our regulatory acts. So first, the first one that has to do with the translation into Russian or from Russian into English. So take any resolution of the government or any regulatory act, so lower level, higher level, so anything, so any resolution, any point, any article, and try to transduce it into a clear modern Russian. At the same time, try not to lose the meaning of this article or what you are translating. And so then if you want to enhance the preamble of the law, preamble is the part which actually interprets the main, gives interpretation to main terms, and then translate it into so the selected component into lucid Russian language, and then take a certain fragment, part, so a verse written in Russian from anything, novel, and translate it into the bureaucratic language, and in the ossified bureaucratic language. So Russian phrase into English. So then one way and the other way. So first from Russian into English, and then and vice versa. And let's see what's going to happen.